Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Beyond Film for Judas and the Black Messiah. We are so proud to partner with Sundance Film Festival in Sundance, Atlanta, here from Morehouse College. And my name is Joe Carlos. I'm the Senior Director of Content Marketing Strategy at Morehouse and a proud member of the class of 2004. And I am very, very excited to speak to this august panel today about this film and about Fred Hampton, Chairman Fred. But the film is Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka King and produced by a number of people, but of course, Ryan Coogler as well. So joining me on the panel today are Avery Williams, David Wall-Rice, and Korstian Vandiver. I just said it right. I said it right and I was practicing. I'm sorry, Korst, but I want to have them all introduce themselves individually, starting with Avery.
Hi, my name is Avery Williams, and I'm an assistant professor at the Cinema, Television, and Emerging Media Studies program at Morehouse College. Typically, we just call it CTIMS, which is the film program there, and that's where I teach, and I'm also a working screenwriter and director.
Good afternoon. My name is David Wall-Rice. I'm a professor of psychology at Morehouse College, where I also lead the Identity, Art, and Democracy Lab. My program of research looks at popular culture and narratives in general, and how it is that understanding our own personal narratives in relationship to society allows for a stronger democracy. I'm a graduate of Morehouse College, class of 1995, and look forward to getting it in with you guys today.
Hi, I'm Korstian Vandiver, otherwise known as Kors. I'm a partner of the Morehouse Human Rights Film Festival, a filmmaker, writer, producer, director, best known for my work with The Birth of a Nation. Currently am producing, co-writing, and set to direct the film 12 about Tamir Rice, the kid who was killed in Cleveland by Cleveland police.
All right, thank you so much for the intros, and I failed to mention at the beginning, of course, the Morehouse Human Rights Film Festival, which is another reason that obviously that Morehouse is proud to partner with Sundance and specifically Sundance Atlanta this year. So saw the film, fortunate enough to, of course, seen this very, very powerful and poignant film, and I am really interested in you all's opinions, not only about the film, but of course about the subject matter. And my first question to anyone who'd like to answer is, I know I could ask, how did you feel about the movie? And we're not going to keep it that surface level. Obviously, you all are some intellectual heavyweights, particularly in this regard, and subject matter experts. So, what about this film do you think, or how do you think this story was told in a different way than similar stories have been told about the Black Panthers? Because we have seen the Black Panthers before on film, or stories of the Black Panthers before on film. So how do you think this story was different, and how do you think it stands out for anyone?
I think one of the things that I say is we haven't had anything this extensive and this detailed in terms of storytelling about the Panthers, and so that was exciting. For me, it really hit differently because I was actually writing a story about Alex Rackley called New Haven. Wow. And so they talk a lot about Alex and George Sams, and there's other people involved, a guy named Kimbrough, and this whole thing that actually kind of it's what derailed the Panthers. It's what takes the Panthers apart, this whole incident. And it's really just because of snitching. You know what I mean? Like there was so many so-called, brothers telling on each other and working with the police and working with the FBI. And I just found that interesting that we were ultimately our own demise in a sense. So that is one aspect for me.
Kors mentions the snitching, and I think that's an interesting touch point, that the entry point to this film is different than a lot of biopics or biopics. In other words, it's not the Fred Hampton story per se in terms of coming at that. It actually came from the point of view of the snitch, of the Judas character, and I think that's an interesting sort of angle to take in terms of presenting the story, because the filmmakers could have easily just started, with the birth of Fred and how Fred rose up and then what happened to him at the end, but they chose a different sort of perspective, which I think sort of highlights the gray areas of things in history, of our movements in history, that everything is not just so cookie cutter or black and white, but actually there are dimensions to our perspectives and our stories. And so that's one of the fresh things I felt about this particular movie that I really loved.
Wonderful.
So I'm curious, in full disclosure, I've not yet seen the film, which means I've watched the trailers 1 and 2 like 1,000 times and just get all emotional around it. But I'm curious, in looking at the snitch, as it were. I'm curious around how our own demise is not ourselves so much as, certainly we want to make sure we're agentic and we understand that, but how it is that this rugged individualism that's part and parcel of white supremacy is kind of dangled in front of us as the win, right? So as I understand it, it's, look, you're caught up, and you can get off. You can be free, and you'll be good to go. But all you have to do is undercut your people, and that is counter to kind of this Afrocentric orientation, or even in Eastern philosophical orientation of how it is that community works. And so it's very interesting in my understanding to look at how just pulling a simple thread pulls the fabric of the power of the people apart, because an individual is not invested in that power to the extent that the black body politic might have been at that time.
David, I think you make a very interesting. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Avery.
David, I think you make a very interesting point, and I think that's a perennial struggle that we find ourselves in, not just during the 1960s, but also even now. It's like, well, I got mine, you get yours, and this whole sense of individualism is definitely underscored by this guy trying to get off for his own sake and not worried about the body politics so much. But the interesting thing about the movie is that we do see an evolution of him of sorts, that he is sort of acquiescing to the larger aggregate issue and concern and social issues of the Black Panther Party, but yet not enough to extricate his own individual wants and desires from being satisfied by betraying Fred Hampton.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Avery, at some point, Mitchell, played by Jesse Plemons, which I really love that Plemons in that role, asks him, he said, well, either you're a great actor, you're up for an Academy, you're going to be up for an Academy Award, or you really believe this. I watched you at this rally, so you obviously really believe this. And it's interesting. You mentioned that you see a rise, I guess, in a sense, or not a rise, but an evolution.
Conflicted.
Of O'Neill's character. When he's with the Panthers, he's one. When he's there, he's like, hey, I'm getting paid. I got this car out of the deal. It's interesting. We've never really seen, I guess, to your initial point, Avery, we've never seen this position from the informant's point of view, and so normally we just see it as the informant's around or whatever. And I thought back after I watched another film recently, Who Killed Malcolm X. I watched that over the summer, and seeing the informants around Malcolm, and then looking at the Easter eggs that actually were in Spike Lee's Malcolm X or X, that he realized who was who and what was what, and it was very subtly. If you watch that, very subtly he mentions them there, but of course we never see their point of view. So I think while Bill was O'Neill, played by Lakeith, masterfully by Lakeith Stanfield, I think he was conflicted in the end, and then overcompensated in many respects because of that internal conflict that he was feeling just in general. So I agree.
So can I ask a question?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
David, let me clarify because I wanted to clarify when I was speaking on the snitching, I was speaking from the aspect of New Haven, Connecticut, and what happened there
Yeah.
with the killing of Alex Rackley, which was
Mm.
he supposedly was a Panther, but he supposedly was an informant. He was 19 years old. You know, he was tortured, he was killed. That supposedly George Sams was also an informant who then snitched on Bobby Seale, or actually lied about Bobby Seale's involvement, though Bobby Seale was in town and had stopped by. You know, it was just a lot of things. And so that particular story has an unraveling. There's a guy who's infiltrated also into the story, and he's there so they can use his car and do this kind of similar things that you'll see in Judas, the Black Messiah. And so it's that particular story has every single aspect of us kind of delivering ourselves up to the situation and circumstances, where this story, though it doesn't delve deep into the issues, you know that those issues are there, right? We know this kid he wants more out of life. He's happy just driving a car so he could be seen in his neighborhood. You know, he's obviously wants good food. We don't see any family. We don't know if he has
No,
family,
we don't see any
right?
exposition in
So
that. Yeah. No, we don't.
yeah, I mean these we know that there's some systemic problems there. So I just wanted to clarify.
No, I appreciate it, and that's helpful. I'm curious if I might ask a question. You all, as filmmakers, what becomes the moral, of the story. So we have this person who has sold out the people, and no matter what the evolution is, the individual gain seems to be greater than the people. So are those lessons for today? I mean, there's so much that's mapped on, obviously, to what's going on. When we look at Fred Hampton being assassinated and we think Breonna Taylor, when we're looking at, we can't, J. Edgar Hoover talking about we can't have a Black Messiah. Why is there the need for one? What's the context? So we don't even talk about, whether it's a Black Messiah or not. Why is that necessary? Who is it that Black folk need to be saved or delivered from? What are the things that you hope are gained out of this film? And I'm sorry, Joe, I realize I'm jumping all over.
You just
Your
lean into
moderator.
lean into your own
I'm
understanding,
sorry.
Dave. Lean into your
I'm
own
sorry.
understanding, Dave. Please.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. Please. That's for the filmmakers to answer.
Great question. It was a great question. That's Avery, I think.
Yeah, so Dave, you're asking for a theme. I think that
Or the lessons, like what are lessons learned? What can we take away, from it? Because it's like you've said it. There are these things that are perennial conflicts and dilemmas that we have to deal with.
I don't know. I guess you could surmise. Come up with a lot of different themes. I'm sorry, lessons. From this. And I don't know. I think I had to take a moment to really dive into that. But think about it. They used a biblical reference with regard to the title on this, which tells me that they were really going way back, in terms of trying to draw a comparison over time, in terms of, who is the real enemy, is it, the guy next to you, or are we the enemy ourselves? And then you're right, this whole presentation of, do we need a Messiah, and who is the Messiah? I really think that it would take some time just to kind of dive in. And that's what's the beauty thing about a good movie like this, is that it does evoke thought. And probably more thought than what we can give into this, 20, 30-minute panel here. But it does probably evoke more questions than it gives answers. And that's why it's one of those things for people who are watching this. I would encourage them definitely, to watch the film, not just for its historical fill in the blanks aspects of it, to fill in what you don't know, but also to challenge your notion of what you think or believe or hold true with regard to leaders in our society, what a society is, and about this whole thing about, well, do you get yours first and then worry about everybody else's later? So, it's a great question, but I don't have an answer right now.
I mean, one thing I can think of too, that I think is a very difficult question. I think one thing I can think of is the idea of sacrificial love, in terms of the parallel that he drew the sacrificial love that can be paralleled through Christ or paralleled through Fred Hampton, paralleled through Martin Luther King, paralleled through Malcolm X, like all of these different people in history that we need, right, to stand up. And there's only so many, right? And there's so many people who stand up in history for something that's right. And the one thing I did take away from Daniel Kaluuya, who was fantastic, I mean, honestly, when he was off the screen, it was hard for me not to think about where is he at, like, you know. But he was always pushing this ideal. It's about the power of the people, and this where there are people, there's power. It's not about me, so much so that he was willing to give up, his money and everything he had. And on the other side, you had a Judas, right? You have somebody who loves somebody. I mean, we always think of Judas like Judas didn't care about Christ. He cared, right? But ultimately, the money, right? The idea of what he could have was greater. And then ultimately, once he had time to reflect on it, I mean, it didn't do anything for him, right? And it was similar. I wish they would have delved a little bit deeper into that in the beginning, kind of what we find out in the end about Wild Bill, from that parallel. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. I was thinking a very similar thing, Course, because I and while I'm not one of the filmmakers that you asked the question of, Dave, I haven't made a film in a while, since Spring '95 Howard.
That's for everybody. That was for
Okay,
everybody. That's for
Spring
everybody.
'95 Howard University film class. But but I was thinking about the exposition. I would have loved to have known what happened right after. And I'm not trying to spoil anything, but we do see, we do understand that
mhm,
he has a conversation. We see the payoff. We see what happens. Fine, no
right.
problem. But what happens after December 4th, '69? What happens in his life? I mean, we get a sentence or two, and some very powerful. We learn some other things very powerfully, and powerful video of him, personally, the actual Wild Bill. But I'm really curious about. I was curious about what led him there, obviously, and I was curious about what happened after, because he was still.
Mhm,
It's a Donnie Brasco type of thing. Your one is so deep undercover, and then how do they then live? How do they maneuver? And when they've been doing this for so long, I think it becomes very difficult. One of the things I think that's it may be lost on people about this, that we haven't necessarily seen, I think, in previous films, about, well, let's just say this. There's a lot of warmth and love here, in the film. There was love, among the Illinois Panthers. Obviously, there was love, a great deal of love for brother chairman, Comrade Fred, and that I thought was one of the most beautiful elements of the film.
Judy.
Yeah, to show their closeness. And I think when we see images of the Black Panthers, normally it's just someone with a gun in front of a government building, or normally it's somebody marching or something like that. But this was an interesting behind the scenes look at their lives as people,
Yeah.
and I thought that added a great human element to it. And the whole time, it's interesting. You were saying when Daniel was off the screen, you were looking like, where is he? I'm thinking timelines in my head. So I'm thinking, like, I know this is all coming to December 4th. Okay.
Mhm.
So so how is that all working? But I really appreciated the work of King and Shaka King and the writers to give us this full scale story. And you, Avery, you just mentioned something about, or David, and you all did, Messiah, Black Messiah, which came from Hoover, which was a serious concern or fear of Hoover's, because this was, with all the things going on in the world, this was the number one thing that seemed to worry him. So I think there's so many things at play there, and I think the film just answered those questions beautifully. So my question to you all is, in addition to all I'm mentioning a lot of things, I'm just excited about this movie. But my questions are, um, when it came down to the writing, and it came down to telling the stories of these central figures, of these people, these people that actually lived. How did you feel about how they were portrayed, and then how are they portrayed as it pertains to the story or the evolution of this chapter in the life of the Black Panthers?
All right, so let me address one thing I think is important, because we're a panel of all men here. That's not lost on our viewers. And at first glance, you could see this movie. It seems to be incredibly testosterone fueled, a lot of guns and shouting and just really, angry men. But I think important in terms of character, Joe, that you mentioned, is that the screenwriters and the filmmakers really infused some strong women in this movie too, and not strong in terms of just wearing a beret and toting a gun, but rather strong in terms of strength of heart. The character of Deborah, played by Dominique Fishback, right, presented a sense of strength and resilience and poetry and I dare say femininity that ran counterpoint, but also in was congruent with what the guys were doing too. So it gave a deeper dimension to this movie that that gave it that wholesome, not wholesome, but that holistic feel that's necessary, I think, in telling a solid story of our past. Because there's, look, guys, we can't shirk it. Women are an essential, are partners in history, and as such, as we tell history, we've got to tell both sides of it. And I think that these filmmakers did a fairly decent job at doing so.
Let me riff off that for a second, because I think, again, this is my deep study of the trailers, right? But as you're talking about the character for Deborah, I think one of the things that's so interesting, and when we talk about radicalism and revolutionary love and things like that, one of the lines that I heard was Deborah saying, you love these people so much you're willing to die for them, but that's easy for you to do because you don't have a life inside you. And that really gives so much the import and responsibility to who and how women are. I have to live for the people, right? Because that's part and parcel of how it is that I give birth to a revolution. I mean, figuratively and quite literally. So I think that those things are so important to look at to look at also.
Yeah, I love Dominique Fishback. I really do. I mean, she could be like 12 and 20, like at the same time. It's just, to me, she's such a great actress. I wish there was actually more for her in this project. And I mean, Judy, the young lady who played Judy as well. I think her name's Deborah. Can't remember for sure, but they, like you said, they're important. They were very important to the story. I think what's funny is I was in Cleveland because we had to go to Cleveland to shoot something to keep the tax credit that we got to shoot in Cleveland for Tamir Rice. And at the same time, we were doing a legacy event for Tamir. It was around the time that he had his death in 2019. And at the same time, Fred Hampton Jr. had come to speak. We were speaking at the event, and we were also filming the event for a documentary portion of the narrative film. And it was amazing to see Fred Hampton Jr. and how much he was like his dad, like the inflections in his voice and that thing. But when we walked out together, I got a chance to speak with him and hang with him for a brief minute. But as we're walking out, everybody apparently is shooting Judas and the Black Messiah. And here comes Dominique Fishback, and I'm seeing a lot of friends, Ian Duff, and who had a role in the film, and gosh, what's his name? I think Brian. Uh, so many of those guys. I think Daniel was somewhere in the back somewhere, but it was amazing to see those people and talk to some of my friends and talk with Dominique and those people coming out at the same time, and the feeling of how important this film was going to be. And I think it definitely has an Oscar dynamic in many facets in terms of the acting, especially. It may fall short in other categories, with the Oscars, but that's not really the biggest thing. And I also think there's a hint of like the Jesse James and the assassination of Jesse James by that coward Robert Ford thing that I think they were trying to do with this film, which for me specifically, I still am a little bit on the fence about the writers. Just there's the hint of nuance that I wonder is missing, and a bit more depth that I wonder is missing, that we could have seen, And that's just my thought on it. But
Follow that up, Cores. Like what depth are you looking for?
so,
Were you looking for?
like for instance, there's you can see these in the trailer. Like Fred Hampton is meeting, with the Latino,
Yeah.
the Crowns, the gang members, white, the white, in quotes, white trash communities, and
Mhm.
he's bringing a rainbow coalition together. I thought, there could have been a deeper delve into that. You know what I mean? Like these relationships, and if we're seeing people, we talked about people getting killed, and we see a funeral. Well, maybe we should have seen that, right? And those people, how they came together around those situations to go after the police. And it may not have been that specific circumstance, but there were others, right? We know there were plenty of things that were going on around that time. And so I was looking for a lot of the action, right? I wanted to see, how they dealt with the children and feeding them, right? Not just him getting arrested in front of them. You know what I mean? So those were things I was looking for. I was looking for some of the historical things that we know that the Panthers did to be put out front versus, so much more exposition. And so I thought there could have been for me just to be able to see a bit more, but that, it's just me. You know what I mean? I don't know that that matters to other people.
No,
Um,
I hear you. I mean, I think the War Council, or not the War Council, well, maybe the peace treaty, the meeting between the Panthers and the Crowns, I think was extremely important.
yeah.
But to your point,
Mhm.
then later we see the Rainbow Coalition, like you said. So obviously there were other meetings that happened where he has this room, which had to terrify. I mean, absolutely. He's at
Right.
that point, he is the Black Messiah. He's literally bringing all these quote unquote warring factions
Right.
together and trying to make change. That's got to be that. Obviously, that terrified Hoover to the point where, there was no other choice
Yeah.
than the inevitable outcome.
And shouts to Charles King. There are people like I know and people who've been Charles King, Aaron Gilbert, gosh, man, like, Poppy Hanks, Macro, you guys are fantastic. I love you guys. So, thank you for what you've done with this film. I just want to say that, it really is an amazing project.
Hey, Joe, since I imagine that a lot of filmmakers and film lovers, of course, are going to be watching this interview, and from Sundance fans, as well as the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival people. So, can we talk a little bit about just the craft of it? In terms of the making of the film. All right, so David, even though you studied the trailers, I'm sure you can you can definitely join in this. Let's first of all talk about the look of it. So Joe, thank you. You got that wonderful poster in back of you, right? And so perfect. So and of course, definitely, please join on in this. I would say first of all, the look works for me. Oftentimes, we see biopics or biopics, with crowd scenes, and everybody looks like they were just plucked out of extras casting. Alexa Fogel is the casting agent on this, and she does a lot of New York based dramas, and her whole staff has an eye for authenticity, as far as I'm concerned. One of the best casting agents out there. So I think they did a marvelous job in terms of just, first of all, casting the faces of people.
This picture here. I mean, this picture is so varied. It's just that shot right there. It's so sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
That's amazing. Right. You're right, Avery. You're right. I mean, it was, man. Like, these people look, from set design to cinematography, that you can't complain about one thing. When you talk about casting and how people look, and those things were, flawless.
And I think it worked. Obviously, it worked well it was another character. Obviously, I think within the story, and those specifically those settings, like the office of the headquarters, was another character. You hear stories about Black Panther Party, okay, all this, but to actually see the work, which I guess Cora is kind of just alluding to, but to actually see the work there in that space, and to see that how busy it was. To see Fred out on the street, and it looked the same. It gave that look like we're in 1968, 69, like the whole time. And this is after Martin's death. I guess it's probably after Bobby's death too. So we're at this specific time, and it never deviated from that. But I really felt like I was there, and every single person I saw on screen, I bought it. I believed it. From top to bottom, every single person, every single scene, and the feeling was very, very genuine. Even though I've never been in a I'm sorry, I keep going back to the scene where the Panthers come and meet the Crowns, but that was tension. That was some serious tense move there.
That was amazing.
Right.
That was amazing because I was like, wow, they have that many guns. Like, it was just so many of them. You know, you get lost at the element of gang life, and you know, in that, you know, we see kind of the offspring of that. You know what I mean, with Gangster Disciples and, you know, the whole Vice Lord thing and how Chicago is now, man. I mean, it's interesting. You know, I wondered watching the movie. I was like, what if Fred Hampton would have lived? Would we have like a Wild West Chirac situation in Chicago? Will we have that now? And that's what hit me, you know, watching that Crown scene, you know, because it's interesting how they were like, almost like, we don't care who you are, we don't care what you do. Like, what he say? It was like, we feed more people than General Mills. Like, it was just, I don't know, man. That scene blew me away in terms of the scope of involvement, you know, of the Crowns in the amount of people that were lost and swept up in that. When you think about how does that happen, right? Fathers, absentee fathers, people getting locked up, people getting killed. I don't know. It was just, that was mind blowing.
I want to follow up on something you asked about the production, the technical aspect. I noticed from the beginning, his first speech out at the school, and when he was the very first scene when he met Deborah, I guess, they shot him from below. And it seemed that was a note that I wrote, that he was being shot from below, and it seemed like he was being made to be. It was an interesting angle the way they kept shooting him, but he seemed larger than life from the beginning. As soon as he opened his mouth, to me, Chairman Fred seemed larger than life, and they kept shooting him kind of when he was speaking in front of people, he was seen in that way. At least that's how I saw him. And so he was on a pedestal. Maybe some of the things he was saying obviously were very profound, obviously, but it was always like someone was looking up to him, and it kind of seemed that way throughout the film. And so there was an instant respect for what he was saying, because the way we were introduced to him, we were literally looking up and listening to this man speak to us and you know, and feed our souls collectively, I think, in that regard too. But I really liked the way they shot that, because it instantly made him seem like an authority on what he was talking about, personally.
Well, hats off, I mean, to the cinematographer Sean Bobbitt, who also worked with Steve McQueen on his films. Here is a cinematographer that knows how to frame, obviously, from what the effect that it had on you, but also he knows how to light Black people. You know, as Coris will tell you, you know, sometimes you get guys who shoot and don't know how to film or shoot Black people. They're either overexposed, where everything is just all bright, or it's underexposed and you just only see the whites of their eyes. I mean, you know, I'm not talking about Alp. I saw an HBO movie or a series not too long ago, and they had a brother. I'll tell you, it's Perry Mason, and they had a brother on there. They underexposed him so much that I swear it was just to point. I had to go look up and say, well, is this brother that dark? You know, so you know, so anyway, so that's a credit, and that's what's one of the beautiful things, to see how beautifully we can be lit if you have the right craftsmen. And hats off to Charles King and to Shaka King for bringing in a crew that knows how to make us look authentic and good at the same time.
Let me answer or address an unasked question of yours, Avery, in this, in talking about casting and lighting and all of this, because you guys are film folk, right? I'm just an academic, right? But the thing that I think becomes so important, I always ask the question, so what? So what? Black people look great, or so what? It looks authentic, and you pick people out that look like the everyday. The so what is because we see ourselves in these stories. So as we're talking about how it is that we're shifting the narrative, you hear that so much that it becomes cliche. But to have movies like this that are able to provide some context for who and how these Black people were becomes so important, because we psychologically, we make sense of our lives based on the stories that we tell about ourselves and in relationship to stories that we hear others telling about themselves. And we see how it is that we can resonate and relate to them. And I think that it becomes so important to have even if this is fiction based on actual events and all this kind of stuff, it becomes important to be able to see yourself in these people, because it allows you to see how great you can be, right? Not just on celluloid, but in real life. So there's a translation that becomes so important there. And it can sound, from an outsider looking in, it can sound like wonky, like, okay, well, we want to make sure he looks beautiful and we want to make sure it looks like ordinary people. But, to your point, Avery, it's so important because we want to see ourselves depicted in ways that are human, right? And that are not objectified, but that are the type of embrace that is important to be afforded to all of us, and how it is that we understand and define ourselves. And in something like this, it becomes so important and so profound, because we look at, the question, Cores, that you asked, what if this kid was 20, he was a kid, he was 21 years old, right? 21 years old, and he's trying to bring all these folks together. And if we can see ourselves in that, then there's something to be said. If we look at that radical love and we can relate to that, it doesn't seem pie in the sky, it seems something that's tangible, that we can relate to, then it allows us to be activated in some meaningful ways to move forward in freedom movement.
No, I totally agree. I think one of the things too I want to touch on what Avery said, just with I think it was actually Joe was speaking first about the cinematography and the low angle thing. I think it's just people actually seem to be uh kind of this people coming out of this generation, a new generation of filmmakers are following Fincher. Really, all the angles are low in that film. His is just higher than everybody else's. It was literally all low angles, and what I've learned from shooting low angles is they make everything look good. And that was something that Fincher like kind of dropped, into the ethos in terms of people who stay, up on, American cinematographer and follow him, and his cinematographers. But I think literally they were using low angles all over. I mean, even when they killed Algie Smith, right? Or Algie Smith died. We got that really cool shot where he was standing over the cop. I mean, that was unbelievable, right? So, yeah, I think Avery was gonna say something. Avery, didn't this cinematographer also shoot Moonlight? Did he shoot Moonlight? Was that him?
I don't think it's the same. I'm not
Oh, it's
sure.
not the same guy. Okay.
Let me since I have the door open real quick. David, I think you say something incredibly interesting as a wonderful jumping off point here, that actually the nexus of what you're saying and the filmmaking choices, and that is, how do we see ourselves when we watch the movies? So here's the question I would pose: do we identify more with the Messiah character or with the Judas character? What is our point of entry there? Because it's kind of hard sometimes to relate to somebody that's so high on the mountaintop and so magnanimous and can speak to thousands of people. But do we identify more with the cats like, I just want to get a car, all right, I just want to get paid? Where is our point of entry with regard to identification when we look at characters on the screen? And I think that's why it really underscores an interesting point that they made, that they took the entry point of storytelling from the Judas point of view, and just perhaps as food for thought, or that maybe that's the point, that's the character most of us can relate to. We can relate more to Judas than we can to Jesus. I'm just saying.
No, hey, look,
That's very deep. I hope not, but man, that's good. It's very good.
But the hope is that that's the device, right? That's a device, Avery, that's used to bring you in, right? This is you. This is you. You can understand and you can relate to this, but this is also you, right? And the hope is that, if you're engaged effectively, you can see yourself in both and, right? You see this dichotomy of how it is you are and how it is that you're conditioned to be. and I don't want to let escape. And, I feel like a one-trick pony sometimes, but we don't want to let escape this context of white supremacy that's surrounding all of this, right? Why is it that there is necessitated a Messiah, and then why is there necessitated a Judas as well? How is it that we are being compromised all the way around? And what is the resilience and the defiance that's at the core of who we are as Black people that allows us to go on, that allows us to recognize our humanity even in the midst of this Judas act? Core said something that was so important in looking at and understand a Judas character, that Judas did not hate Jesus, right? He loved him, but there was something compromised in his psyche that did not allow him to invest in the way that all others were able to, at least the other disciples, right? So how is it that we can ensure that we are lifting up the best parts of ourselves and pushing to the side those things that would compromise not only us but movements?
Yeah, I agree. And to Avery's to that point, so I have a podcast, Open Task podcast, where we discuss movies and film, and that's who do you relate to is one of our questions for in every film, and regardless of whether it's House Party or the Royal Tenenbaums, we ask this week it's Cotton Club, but we ask who do you relate to, and I think that question, Avery, is extremely important, especially and underscored obviously by the questions that David, that you're asking, of course, and the questions that you're asking as well, of course. Given the fact that obviously this is a profound film, and of course you mentioned Oscar, you mentioned awards, and obviously films aren't made for awards. Films are made obviously to tell stories, but we can't help but notice or mention that given the strong performances I think in this film, that there should be some consideration across the board, just for the amazing work that obviously went into this film, and I appreciate you all for mentioning many of those filmmakers by name, literally by name. What other final takeaways do you have from this film, from Judas and the Black Messiah? Whomever.
Yeah, I'm honestly still processing a lot of this film. I thought a night was gonna do it, and I woke up in the middle of the night, kind of thinking about things and running things through my head. But I think this discussion has honestly been very helpful for me. Just some of the analogies that you guys have brought to the light, and things to think about. Right? Who am I? I think if you need to look at this film, the one thing you can come away with is who do you want to be, right? What person do you want to be? And when I look at, this as an overall and in the context, I want to be the sacrificial person. I said this to myself and I'm still pushing, but I said this last year and I said, to a lot of people I'm producing with, friends, shout out to Danielle, Lee, who's a co-writer on the film, and producer Elliot Williams, who's Sundance alum as well. I told them, and I tell other people, I want to love people more than I love filmmaking. That says a lot for me, right? Because I really love filmmaking. And so I have to make sure that the way I interact as an artivist, because that's what I believe I am, is an activist and an artist that blends together. I have to love people more than I love this craft. And so that's the thing that I took away from the film even more. Was like, I got to continue to push and push to do that. If I can love people more than I love film, maybe I can do something great that'll help people and change the scope of filmmaking and maybe the world in terms of how people see themselves. And so I think that's what this film did for me.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm just glad I'm just glad it's out there for us to wrestle with. The story is so important, and these truths need to be told. And so that I'm from the first time that I saw it, that it was coming out, you get goosebumps, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the filmmakers for putting it square for us, because I think it's so important for us to wrestle with during this time. Ourselves meaning Black folk, but also white folk as well. You know, who are you in this film? I think becomes an important question also.
I think the key word for me is courage. And I'm going to use courage with respect to potential filmmakers. Because, and this is what I want to point out, is that history is, of course, not black and white, that there are shades. There are shades to any story. There's shades to us, you know. And so as a filmmaker, I think that you want to be courageous enough to not be afraid to show the dark side of characters, to show the evolution, this this arc that happens within people, that happens within their morals, their values, because that is reflective of our humanity. And of course, we want to arc and move towards becoming a better version of ourselves. But oftentimes we fall. Oftentimes we just don't make it. And so I would say this film speaks to me from a filmmaking point of view of showing this is history. But the story of history is definitely nuanced in so many ways, and I appreciate the nuances of this story. I appreciate the shades of gray. I appreciate all of that, and that is to me courageous storytelling. Hats off to all these guys who made the film, and I want to encourage them to keep doing it, and other filmmakers who are watching this to do the same thing. Just don't go for the big highs and lows, but rather look for the nuances, to look for between the beats, and that's where you'll find the truth and the authenticity that you're going for.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I sincerely appreciate it. And again, thank you for your time and your candor and gosh, I really appreciate it. I truly appreciate this conversation, and I look to future conversations talking about films that are just as heavy, or hopefully someday films that are a little lighter as well. But nonetheless, I appreciate this deep dive with you all today, and we'd like to give a huge thanks to, of course, Sundance Film Festival, Sundance Atlanta, and the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival, and Atlanta Film Festival, and thank you so, and of course CTM's at Morehouse. Yeah, shout out.
Yeah.
I was there the first day,
Society.
12. I was down there with all those big old IMAX. Very jealous of all those big old IMAX. I was there the first
We're
day.
not there.
No, I was there. I was there as a working an admissions. Like, I wish we'd had this, but I'm so happy that we do. So thank you, Coors. Thank you, David. Thank you, Avery, and to the filmmakers, like Avery said, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
this extremely important film. Watch the film. It is released on in
February
theaters, and yeah, on the February
HBO
12th
Max.
theaters and on HBO Max. Same day. On February 12th. So thank you very, very much.
You guys are awesome, man.
All right.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Have a good day now.
God bless.
Cut that